Welcome back. In this video, you'll understand what is JPA, why JPA, how to use Hibernate as an implementation of JPA, and a lot of JPA annotations. Let us get started. In a normal application, you'll be having layers, and inside data access layer of your application, you'll be writing all the data access logic. Assume that you are using Hibernate in your data access layer today. You write all your code using Hibernate API like session, session factory, transaction, etc. But let's assume later you found another good ORM like Eclipse Link. You want to use Eclipse Link instead of Hibernate. What all changes do you need to make? You need to rewrite the whole data access layer using Eclipse Link API instead of Hibernate API. So you are not portable. You cannot port from one ORM vendor to other ORM vendor easily. You are locked to a particular vendor. So what we want is a vendor independence. That is the reason why we use JPA. JPA is a specification. As you know, in specification, they give a lot of interfaces to be implemented. So, in JPA also there are interfaces like Entity Manager Factory, Entity Manager Factory is a class, but Entity Manager Factory is similar to the one in Session Factory in Hibernate. Entity Manager is the interface, Entity Transaction, like that there are a lot of interfaces. So JPA is just a specification which contains a lot of interfaces, and it gives us some annotations as well. The implementations have to be provided by some third party vendors. Now, this JPA is, you can assume it is similar to JDBC specification. So what? In JDBC specification also we have interfaces like statement, prepared statement, connection, etc. right? And where is the implementation for this statement, prepared statement and all? Inside the driver jars. But in my code, what we use? We use interfaces given in JDBC. In our code, we create a variable of interface statement and then call methods on it. Suppose today I am using Oracle as my database, and if I want to shift or migrate from Oracle to MySQL, what do I need to do? I just need to change the driver jar and basic configuration. The code remains the same. So by using JDBC API in my code, I am vendor independent. Is it? Similarly, JPA is a specification. It comes up with a lot of interfaces. In our code, we write logic using interfaces. Interface reference will be pointing to an implementation dynamically. So what we can do is, we can use JPA interfaces in our code, and we can plug any implementation of JPA just by changing some configuration and adding some jars. So this JPA is a specification, and Hibernate framework wants to implement JPA specification. So what they did, they don't want to actually redo everything. They don't want to change the code base. This JPA specification was launched in around 2005-2006. But by this time, Hibernate was already popular. They don't want to change their code base just to implement JPA. So what they did is like this. Already Hibernate core is a package which contains all the Hibernate modules. This is all the Hibernate core API. On top of this core API, they wrote one more module called as Hibernate Entity Manager. Hibernate Entity Manager is implementing this JPA. That means in JPA there is interface, we know that it is Entity Manager, Entity Transaction, etc. right? The implementations for all these interfaces is present in Hibernate Entity Manager. So in our code, what we do is we create a reference of Entity Manager and we call methods on it. It means that if I want to save, I will call something like Entity Manager dot persist and pass the entity. Whenever I call Entity Manager dot persist in my code, I am calling a method on an interface reference. Interface reference will be pointing to an implementation present here. So whenever we call persist method on this Entity Manager, it will be translated to session dot persist or session dot save. Who is translating this JPA calls to Hibernate calls? This Entity Manager, Hibernate Entity Manager module. So Hibernate Entity Manager is acting as a bridge which can translate JPA calls to Hibernate calls. Hope you understood what is this Entity Manager. Similar to Hibernate Entity Manager, for Eclipse Link also they have written an implementation of JPA. Top Link, lot of other ORMs have an implementation of JPA. If today I am using Hibernate in my code, Hibernate API as an implementation of Java Persistence API, I can just switch from Hibernate to Eclipse just by changing some configuration. So I achieve vendor independence if I am using JPA. That is the first reason why we use JPA. So let us get started with code. And again in Hibernate, where do we map our class to table? Inside hbm.xml files, is it? But in JPA, they came up with some annotations, common annotations, which will be same for all the ORMs. So whenever you are using JPA, we don't use hbm.xml. We use annotations for mapping class to tables. Let us see how to do that. See here, I have a class called as account in this project. I want to map this class account as an entity and map it to a table. Very simple. I don't need to write hbm.xml file. I can use annotations. I will use entity annotation. Entity says that this account class is an entity. And what is the table to be mapped? I can use an annotation called as table. Name is equals to, I can give whatever table I want. I'll say account underscore JPA. If I don't write table annotation, by default class name will be assumed to be the table name. That is a good practice to use a table annotation. Okay. Then I want this account number to be treated as primary key. So I have to just annotate it with ID. And I want this primary key to be automatically generated. So I will use generated value. And which strategy to use? Generator is equals to sorry, not this. Strategy is equals to auto. Auto is equivalent to native in Hibernate. So I have this generated value. Now how to map this to a column? I can use a column annotation. I'll say column name is equals to a underscore num. And similarly, if I want to map account this name, I will use again column annotation. Column, I'll give name is equals to something like a underscore name. Like that I can use column annotation on top of every field. Or if I don't use column annotation, by default every property is assumed to be a column in the table. You don't need to annotate every field with column annotation. That is one advantage if you are using annotations. But whereas when you are mapping using HBM files, you need to write a property tag for each and every property. But if you are using annotations, even though you don't write column annotation on top of a field, by default field name will be assumed to be the column name. But you may ask me, hey, what if I don't want to map a particular variable to a column? By default, all fields are mapped to columns. If I don't want to map, so what I can do is I can use annotation called as transient. Any variable annotated with transient will not be mapped to a column. Is that okay? So this is a way to do a basic mapping. We'll see a lot of other mappings going on further. And to map date, one more thing, we can use temporal annotation and specify how the date should be stored. Temporal, and we can specify the temporal type. You want this date to be stored as date type or time or timestamp. You can specify whatever you want. I will store it as date. And you can specify the column name as well by using column annotation. So we have done this mapping. Now what we want to do is we want to save this account into database. In Hibernate, where did we specify how to connect to database, the URL, username and password, etc.? Hibernate.cfg.xml. Hibernate.cfg.xml was the main configuration file for Hibernate. But for JPA, what we have to do is, inside class path we should have a folder called as meta-inf, and inside that we need to write a file called as persistence.xml. Persistence.xml is the main configuration file for JPA. The root tag is persistence belonging to this namespace and we can have one persistence unit or multiple persistence units. One persistence unit represents one data source or one database, and you have to identify a persistence unit by using a unique name. This name will be referencing in our code. I will show you later. Then, who is the persistence provider? Persistence provider by default, persistence provider here in this case I am configuring it as Hibernate persistence. That tells I want to use Hibernate as an implementation of JPA. Even I don't need to write this provider tag. What you can do is, if you have Hibernate entity manager jar in your class path, let me open it. Hibernate entity manager, meta-inf, services. See, there is a file called as javax.persistence.spi.persistence provider. Here, if I open, this value is there. So automatically this file will be recognized and the value inside this will be used as a persistence provider. If you just have entity manager jar in your class path, that should be fine. You don't need to even write this provider tag. But if you have Hibernate jar as well as Eclipse link jar in your class path, then there is a conflict. So in such cases, you can use provider tag explicitly. So provider tag says who is the persistence provider. Hibernate is the persistence provider in this case. Then we'll be having mapping of class to table using annotations, right? We just need to write the names of all the annotated classes like this. All the entities should be mapped by using class tag. Then whatever we are configuring in hibernate.cfg.xml, similar key value pairs are here. Here we are configuring dialect, URL, driver class name, username and password. If you go back and refer cfg.xml, these are the same key value pairs. So that's it. We are done with configuring persistence.xml. This is similar to hibernate.cfg.xml in Hibernate. Okay. Once we are done, let us see how to save an entity. So here I have an account object. I want to save this account object. So in Hibernate, what we did the first step, we got an object of session factory. Similarly, here also we need to get an object of entity manager factory. How? There is a class called as persistence, and inside that there is a static method called as get entity manager factory. We have to pass the persistence unit name. What is the persistence unit name? I gave persistence unit name as mypu. So once I do this, the return value of this method is nothing but entity manager factory. I'll say EMF. So this static method looks for a persistence unit. It will read this configuration and it will create entity manager factory. Then once entity manager factory is created, we have to say EMF dot create entity manager will get an entity manager reference. Entity manager. This is equivalent to session in Hibernate. Why the name entity manager? Don't you think session is managing all the entities? Once you keep an object in session, that means once an object is in persistent state, Hibernate will manage all the persistence entities, right? Session will manage all the persistence entities. If you modify any persistence entity, it will be marked as dirty and all the dirty changes will be propagated to database. You remember, right? So session is managing all your entities, or we can call session also as an entity manager. That's why in the specification, instead of using a word session, they used entity manager. So as of now, you can assume entity manager is similar to a session. Then once we have an entity manager, we have to get the transaction. Entity manager dot get transaction will give you entity transaction. Then we have to begin the transaction, et dot begin, and whenever you want to commit, et dot commit, and we have to close the entity manager, em dot close. Now how to save? Entity manager dot persist account object. That's it. This is a way to save an entity. So in my persistence.xml, it is pointing to HDB database. Let me drop the database and I am recreating it. So once I run HBM to DDL, I have configured as update table should be automatically created. Let me run. Yeah, I see an insert statement. Let me check in the database. I'll refresh. Yeah, pro is inserted. Is that? So this is a basic code to save an entity using Java persistence API. Now let us see a few more things. How to fetch an entity by primary key? It's very simple. In Hibernate, we used to say session.get. Here we'll say entity manager dot find. Which entity? Account dot class, and what's the primary key? New long of, I have primary key 1. So this entity manager dot find is a generic method. I don't need to even typecast. Do you remember whenever we said session.get, we had to typecast it to account object. Now we don't need to typecast, so we'll get an account object. Let us see, it will print city of the account or not. I will run this. Yep, city is Bangalore. So this is a way to get an entity by primary key. Okay. Now what is similar to session.merge? We have entity manager dot merge. Let me show you. See, I have a code to create an entity manager. I am retrieving an account with ID 1 and closing the entity manager. That means account became transient. Sorry, account become detached. Once account is detached, I am modifying the detached entity and I want to merge it. How to merge? Very simple. Entity manager dot, we'll see merge. What? I need to merge account object. So what is happening? If you have seen the Hibernate video, this whatever values are there present in the account object will be copied to account 2, which is already there in the session. Now we will be getting the reference of the merged object. So in this case, account 2 is equivalent to, is identical to account 3, right? The first statement should be true. The second statement should be false. Third statement also should be false. Analyze why you are false. The explanation about this is already given in the Hibernate, in my previous Hibernate video. That's why I am not repeating it again. Let me run. Where is it? Printing true, false. See, the first one is true and these two are false. That means after you call entity manager dot merge, the previous account object, the values of previous account object are merged or copied to account 2. So that means account 2 became dirty, which will result in an update query. And this merge method returns same reference of account 2. So account 3 and account 2 will be pointing to same object. Okay. So this is internally calling session.merge, and I don't need to explain what is happening in session.merge. And similarly, similar to Hibernate, if you make changes to any persistent object, that will result in an update query. If you see here, I used entity manager.find to get an entity by primary key. That means now account is in persistent state. Once I modify any persistent state, it will be marked as dirty, and whenever transaction is committed, the changes will be flushed to database. Let us check if it works or not. So city should be Hyderabad in my database. Right now it is Bangalore. Let me refresh. Oh, it's Delhi, sorry, it became Delhi, but I changed the city to Hyderabad. Why is the change not coming here? Because I didn't start the transaction. So I'll say get transaction. I'll be getting entity transaction. Then here I'll commit entity transaction dot commit. Now let me run. What is it saying? Transaction is not active. Very good. See, here I got a transaction object. Once I get a transaction object, I would say entity transaction dot begin. Whereas in Hibernate API, session.begin transaction was beginning a transaction, giving me a transaction object. But here in JPA, you have to get the transaction object and then say begin. Until you say begin, transaction will not be active. Now let me run. Query is fired, update query is fired, and let me check in database. The city should be Hyderabad. Yup, it got committed. So this is similar to the one in Hibernate session. In session, if you make any object as dirty, automatically dirty changes will be propagated, the same as the one we saw in Hibernate. Now, how to write JPA queries? Very simple. Again, entity manager dot create query. I'll pass the JPA query. JPA queries are similar to Hibernate queries because when JPA specification is being written, Hibernate developers were part of JPA specification team and they influenced JPA specification a lot. So the queries, all Hibernate queries will be similar to the ones in JPA except very few. So to retrieve all accounts, it is same as SQL query from account. A will retrieve all accounts, but we want accounts based on city Bangalore and country India. From account A, where A dot city is equals to colon, I'll give my city, and A dot country is equals to colon my country. Then query dot set, what city is a string, so I'll use set string. Is it there? No, we have to use set parameter. Parameter name is my city. Value I want to give as, right now in my database it is Hyderabad, so I'll give Hyderabad. And country, query dot set parameter. Now country, I'll say my country, India. Then query dot get result list. If you remember in Hibernate it is session dot query dot list, but in JPA it is query dot get result list. Will give a list of accounts. Let us check. Query is fired and it is printing the name. Is the query fired? Select query. Yes, it's fired based on country and city. So this is the simplest way to fire a JPA query, which is similar to firing SQL query. And how to use named queries now? If you want to use named queries, earlier we are writing named queries in HBM.XML. Now we don't want to write in HBM.XML. What we can do is we can write named query, name is equals to get accounts by city and country, and comma query is equals to, I'll just copy paste this query. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll just get this query, entity manager dot create named query. Earlier I used create query, now I am using create named query. What is the named query name? There's the one. That's it, rest all are same. Let me check. Yep, query got fired based on city and country. So that's it. Since there are no accounts in Bangalore, I'll just have to change as Hyderabad. Then I'll get some rows. Let me run. Yep. So we understood how to fire named queries. So we are done with basics of JPA. We understood how to perform CRUD operations, create, read, update, delete operations. Oh, how to remove, how to delete an entity manager dot remove. So we understood how to fire CRUD operations using JPA. In my next videos, we'll be parallelly seeing other annotation configurations as well. See you in next video.